I think where I want to take this conversation and ask you guys, I consider myself to be a very strong woman. And I know there are a lot of strong women in society who maybe resonate with what you just described as masculinity, as like, hey, that's kind of my mentality too. Where I want to take this is I see myself in a relationship with a very masculine man as well. And I think for a lot of women, it's quite difficult for them to lean into their feminine energy because they've almost had to, or because of the way society is these days, because of what they're doing day to day, they lean into a lot of masculine energy as well. And so what I want to ask the both of you is, how do you see your role as supporting or being with strong women, just in general terms? Maybe it's not specific to both your experiences right now, but just in general, as a man being with a very strong woman, how can they support her so she can be who she is, but in a safe way that she can embrace her femininity? Because I think it's an interesting one where a lot of women don't want to let that guard down. They don't want to let it go. You know, they feel like they need to be independent and do it all themselves. And I can understand why that is the case. But then I wonder, is that because there's a lack of support, or are they filling a gap almost for a masculine energy that's not in their life? I don't know if I've asked the question succinctly or not, but this is generally what I'd like to get your thoughts on.
Yeah. I'd actually like to pose a question back to yourself, just for the sake of making it very succinct. When we talk about strength, are we talking about masculinity, or are we talking about strength? Because to me, a strong woman isn't a woman whose perpetual station is her masculinity. That's actually the antithesis of what I would consider to be a strong woman. So when we're talking about strength, what is it we're actually talking about? Are we talking about a woman who's in her divine femininity? Or are we talking about a woman who's struggles to kind of draw herself from a masculine frame into a feminine frame?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, because that's a very interesting question, what you've just posed back to me. But I think what I'm talking about is women being in their masculine energy and being there because there is a lack of support, or they feel they don't have that elsewhere. And so they're unable to, because I interestingly spoke about this a few weeks ago, how being softer as a woman is a strength, because you are in those, you're in that creative energy, you're in this beautiful place, which is kind of where we feel, or I feel myself, like really flowy, and it's easeful for me to be there. It's not this slog. So I think, to answer your question and to throw it back at you, it's for us women who feel stuck or more pulled in our masculine.
Well, I'd say that it's twofold. Society supports that consensus, and we can go back as far as even just prior to the first wave feminism, when men went off to war and women had to replace men in the workforce. And then what happened was the men came back, a lot of them were injured soldiers and maybe couldn't work. So women ended up picking up the slack. But everything sits under the overarching umbrella, which is capitalism. And now, in essence, you got two people, both man and woman, working for half the wage. So you kind of need a woman to work. And you think about, I always say form creates function. Man is made to work. You know what I mean? Woman is made to nurture, right? You have the nurturing natural capabilities, and your form also supports that. That doesn't mean we can't cross over. I'm just saying it's not completely binary. But with that, it supports women being in their masculine framework, because you spend more time at work than you do anywhere else if you work a 9 to 5, that is, right? Or any just entrepreneurial endeavor. So with that, women are made to bear the burdens of performance that was assigned to the masculine framework, which pushes women into their masculinity. And now with this, the ideas of masculinity and manhood being so perverted and turned on its head, you got men acting within their feminine framework. And then that creates a dissonance, isn't it, right? So you got women who are, in essence, perpetually masculine, which is a weakness. And you got men who are perpetually feminine, which is also a weakness. And there's no polarity that exists there, because the true polarity is a man more in his masculine frame and a woman more in her feminine frame in most cases. So I think to speak about it at a nuclear level, we've got to also speak about it at a societal level, and speak about how our own actions are an act of activism towards changing this. And we're either moving in that trajectory or we're pushing against it. But the pushing against is always going to be the few, not the many.
I think it's before I hand over to you, Manny, I just think it's something really interesting. Most of our listeners are females, and I think it comes to this interesting time. Manny, we were speaking about it very briefly before we jumped on the podcast, where you're considering stepping into that nurturer role, becoming a mother, right? That's something I'm thinking about now, but I also have this cross with a lot of things I want to achieve. And that's not to say that if I want to achieve stuff, that's masculine, but I do feel a very big, different energetic kind of pull in both directions. And so I think it's just interesting for everybody to reflect on the origin of women in the workforce. And it's absolutely not a bad thing. I actually feel blessed to live in a time where I have opportunity. But I think it's interesting when you peel it away and come back to source and come back to energy and just think about what that means for our society, for a nuclear family, for different bits and pieces.
It's chaos in my head, you know? And for a very long time, I did not know how to deal with this because I'm like, I'm just thinking it through. I know what I'm doing. But then I started journaling, and that really changed the game for me.